Hey y'all, welcome to Life Behind the Music and Cameras. Before we get into our story, I appreciate if you guys checked out my new online YouTube store, Lady T's Books and More. We offer a large variety of scented candles, dessert candles, drink candles, resin items. We even have adult novelty wax melts and candles for baby showers and bridal showers. Thank you. Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. Now, like I said before, and I'll say it again. If you don't like the way I read, feel free to go to another channel. Negative comments are not welcome. I appreciate the love and the support. That's unnecessary. Okay, now, I would appreciate if you guys, subscribe to my membership so you can get some perks so I can start shouting you guys out, so I can start doing lives, so I can meet some of you guys. I would love to meet my subscribers and whatnot. Like, for real, it ain't even just about the money. You know what I'm saying? I would love to meet y'all. Y'all never seen me, and I never seen y'all. Okay, anyway, this is how ghettos in America got started. Ghettos in the U.S. are typically urban neighborhoods perceived as being high in crime and poverty. The origins of these areas are specific to the United States and its laws, which created ghettos through both legislation and in private efforts to segregate America for political, economic, social, and ideological reasons. Facto jure and de facto segregation. De facto segregation continues to present day in ways such as residential segregation and school segregation because of contemporary behavior and the historical legacy of de jure segregation. American ghettos, therefore, are communities and neighborhoods where government hasn't only concentrated a minority group, but established barriers to its exit. Inner city is often used to avoid the word ghetto, but typically denotes the same idea. Geographic examples of American ghettos are seen in large urban centers such as New York City, Chicago, and Detroit. American ghetto usually denotes an urban neighborhood with high crime rates, gang violence, and extreme poverty, with a significant number of minority citizens living amongst it. Their origins are manifold. Historically, violence has been used to intimidate certain demographics into remaining in ghettos. Deindustrialization of minorities and the lower class Americans also contributed to ghetto forming in inner cities. Additional causes of deteriorating conditions in the hood range from lack of employment and extreme destitution to menacing streets of violence. Development of ghettos through modern housing segregation can also come to blame on de facto racism as well as de jure segregation. Centralized racism began the segregation, but with the legal barriers to entry for African Americans having fallen, the price rather than the legality of living in certain areas has excluded blacks. Rent vouchers and other forms of remnants have been proposed as a way of desegregating America. In the findings of a study conducted by Brandeis University, one of the major factors of the huge racial wealth gap in America is due to the disparities in home ownership in America. It would be difficult to pinpoint the beginning of housing discrimination in the U.S., since most forms of discrimination in America overlap, but an extension of Jim Crow laws was made manifest in home ownership and American public housing policies. These discriminatory federal and state policies, in conjunction with private sector fear for economic loss, led to the systemic exclusion of minorities from loans, access to credit, and higher income. This practice is called redlining. In 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, a federal government-sponsored program, was created as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal to combat the Great Depression and to help assist homeowners who were in default on their mortgage and foreclosure. This assistance was mostly in forms of loans and federal aids that last for over 25 years. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the National Housing Act of 1934, also known as NHA, which established the Federal Housing Administration, FHA. This federal policy heightened the worsening of minority inner city neighborhoods caused by the withholding of mortgage capital, and it made it even more difficult for neighborhoods to attract and retain families able to purchase homes. The assumptions in redlining resulted in a large increase in residential racial segregation and urban decay in the United States. The HOLC under the NHA and in cooperation with the FHA and the Federal Banking Home Loan Board sent surveyors and examiners to go to these cities and speak with local banks, city officials to determine the lending risk in different neighborhoods. Factors for determining high-risk sectors included geography: where is the city located? How close is the city to a park? Does it have commercial establishments? Is it close to a factory? And will pollution be a problem? How old are the apartments or homes? And so on and so forth. All of these factors play into determining whether a city is a highly desirable location for the FHA loans or a high-risk or hazardous zone. Color-coded maps were used to distinguish different localities to give loans. Blue represented a highly desirable locale. Yellow acknowledged a declining and depreciating area. Red identified a hazardous zone. This is what was called the residential security map. Areas that were coded as red zones had to pay higher interest rates and struggled to access FHA loans. The majority of the people who lived in the red zones were African American and other minorities. Poverty in the Black community increased significantly due to lack of jobs and assistance from the government. Access to credit was based on collateral and geographic residence of applicants, which automatically disqualified most Blacks and other minorities since they were concentrated, deteriorated areas. Many middle-class Blacks sought to migrate to the industrial Midwest and Northeast and other places for better opportunities and to leave the red zone areas, but very explicit racial exclusion ordinances prevented Blacks from finding places outside of the red zones. Even in areas where exclusion laws were not in effect, real estate professionals instilled fear that Blacks would invade white communities and eventually turn them into a red zone. This led to the white flight, the exodus of whites out of the inner city into the suburbs, and blockbusting in the 1960s and 70s. Minorities continued to migrate into the red zone communities as it was difficult for them to afford to live anywhere else. The higher taxes and pricing on homes and rentals in the red zones led to constant depreciation in these neighborhoods. In addition to encouraging Caucasian families to move to suburbs by providing them loans to do so, the government uprooted many established African American communities by building elevated highways through their neighborhoods. To build a highway, tens of thousands of single-family homes were destroyed. Because these properties had been summarily declared to be in decline, families were given penances for their properties and were forced into federal government housing called the projects. To build these projects, still more single-family homes were demolished. Although Congress has passed several legislations to end de jure segregation in America, de facto segregation still persists in America's schools and cities. People have the right to live in communities of their choice, and due to cultural, economic, social, and personal reasons, self-segregation continues to prevail in America. Desire of some whites to avoid having their children attend integrated schools has been a factor in white flight to the suburbs and in the foundation of numerous segregated private schools, which most African American students, though technically permitted to attend, were unable to afford. Recent studies in San Francisco showed that groups of homeowners tended to self-segregate to be with people of the same education level and race. By 1990, the legal barriers enforcing segregation have been mostly replaced by indirect factors, including the phenomenon where whites pay more than Blacks to live in predominantly white areas. The residential and social segregation of whites from Blacks in the United States creates a socialization process that limits whites' chances for developing meaningful relationships with Blacks and other minorities. The segregation experienced by whites from Blacks fosters segregated lifestyles and leads them to develop positive views about themselves and negative views about Blacks. Buchanan versus Worley, the Supreme Court of the United States sought to overturn a city ordinance that restricted housing rights. The city ordinance in question prevented Blacks from purchasing in an area where more whites lived and whites from buying in an area where more Blacks lived. As a result, year after year, the segregation of racial minorities will become more pronounced as time and restricted purchasing options funnel them into areas outside of white-dominated areas. The Supreme Court ruled by unanimous decision that the ordinance from the city of Louisville, Kentucky violated the freedom of contract guarantee under the 14th Amendment. Cities could not enact racially restrictive covenants. Corrigan versus Buckley didn't directly affect the Buchanan versus Worley ruling on city ordinances, but rather it allowed neighborhoods to enact racially discriminatory covenants. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled that neighborhoods could enact racially discriminatory covenants and that the state could enforce them. Due to the agreements being private contracts, the court ruled that it couldn't be regulated by the government. As a result of this case, racially discriminatory covenants spread across the U.S. and led to more segregated housing. In Hansberry versus Lee, the Supreme Court ruled that due to many of the affected parties not being represented in a previous case on racially exclusive covenants in a neighborhood of Chicago, the case would be contested once again. This has become a landmark case for res whatever that word is, also known as claim preclusion, is a Latin term for judged matter and refers to either of two concepts in common law civil procedure: a case in which there has been a final judgment and that is no longer subject to appeal, and the legal doctrine meant to bar or preclude relitigation of a claim between the parties, and this opened the door to the case of Shelley versus Kramer. Shelley versus Kramer was a landmark case in housing rights in America, contrary to the Supreme Court of Missouri's decision, which ruled that racial exclusionary covenants were private contracts. Excuse all that noise in the background, that was my roommate. Shelley versus Kramer was a landmark case in housing rights in America, contrary to the Supreme Court of Missouri's decision, which ruled that racial exclusionary covenants were private contracts. The Supreme Court ruled that racially exclusionary covenants violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. This decision was 6-0 due to 3 exclusionary covenants. Okay, y'all. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.